Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So today I thought I would do something a little bit different to my usual tutorial videos and attempt a drawing challenge. The challenge I'll be attempting today is like a redraw challenge. So you'll see a lot of people on YouTube basically take their old drawings and update them with the skills that they've gained. Or sometimes they'll take someone else's drawing and redraw it in their own style. Today what I'll be doing is looking at some old school American traditional tattoo flash from the 40s and 50s. And I'll basically be attempting to redraw it in my own style or my own interpretation to update and modernize the artwork. Let's go ahead and jump into it. Okay guys, so this first one that I'm doing is from an old American traditional flash sheet. I think it was done in the 1960s by a guy named C.O.L. Todd, or that's who the flash sheet was put under anyways. And so I'm going with a little basic skull design as sort of a warm-up for this challenge, or as I called it, a round one. What I sort of like to do is take these old school drawings, because they're usually, a lot of the time, they're not drawn really well. They're out of proportion, they're a little bit wobbly, the lines are a bit shaky. But that sort of has a certain appeal to it. I actually like that old school look. I think it's quite interesting. And so what I like to do, I guess, is just take these designs sometimes and rework them in a style that suits my own. It's not necessarily my own style, I suppose, but my own interpretation, I guess you could call it. So I sort of like to just take these old designs, add a little flair of my own, and then also just try to include as many traditional elements into them. So I like to use big, bold, big fat lines on a lot of these designs. You'll see that I go through and boost those lines a little bit later. This is to sort of stick with that old school sort of way of working. Try to do nice big fat lines. Try to keep the shapes fairly consistent, and you know, all the skulls that I do generally look pretty similar if they're in that old school style. And as you can see here, I'm going through and just lining everything with a Copic multi-liner 0.5 in black. This is what I'll generally start all of my line work with. I usually then go in with a Copic multi-liner 0.8 and boost up some of those lines. So you'll see me doing that now. So yeah, this first one was pretty straightforward. It wasn't too much of a challenge, going through and sort of updating that style a little bit and adding my own touch to it. I draw a fair few skulls and old school style designs. It's something I've been interested in for a little while. So yeah, as you can see, the process on this one was pretty quick. You'll see now that I'm using Liquitex acrylic inks, red and black for this one. I do all of my black shading using Liquitex black. You're probably wondering why my brushes have a whole bunch of electrical tape wrapped around them. It's actually just to support, add a little bit of padding and support to the grips. And for those of you who don't know, I also suffer from carpal tunnel syndrome, and I find that having a wider grip can sometimes alleviate a bit of the pressure. It doesn't do too much, but you know, a little bit's better than nothing. So anyways, basically just going through here and shading in all of the blackest parts of the design and fading them out to a nice grey. Normally when I do this sort of stuff, I like to work on Fabriano cold press watercolor paper. I think it gives these old school designs a really traditional look and a nice texture to them. Unfortunately, I didn't have any laying around, so we are using Fabriano hot press watercolor paper today. For those of you who don't know the difference, hot press watercolor paper is a lot smoother and not nearly as absorbent as cold press, so it tends to be a little bit better, in my opinion, for working with markers or mixed media in general. Markers, inks, paints, you know, colored pencils, you name it, because it can sort of take a fair bit of abuse, whereas cold press watercolor paper, I think, is really only designed for working with watercolor paints or water-based inks. And so we're pretty much coming to the end of this one here. We're adding in those colors. Okay guys, so jumping into round 2, we are drawing or attempting to redraw a traditional panther head tattoo. Now this particular design is coming out of the 1950s, I believe, from a flash sheet by Bert Grimm. He was only 15 years old when he started tattooing and lived till 85 years old, I believe. Made a really large amount of contributions to the art over that time and inspired a lot of younger people in the arts. And yeah, I believe he was one of the guys that really pushed the art to the next level and, you know, tried to strive for quality and excellence. This is off one of his sort of animal flash sheets. He did a whole bunch of tiger heads, a lion head, a panther head, and all that sort of thing. So I thought I'd go through and try and redraw one of those. I actually really tend to enjoy drawing tiger heads and panther heads in this traditional style. You can make them look really gnarly and really angry, which is what I tend to like to do. So you can see here I'm just penciling all my lines in and laying out foundations for this one. For those of you new to drawing, or even if you've been at it for a little while, I think one of the most important things in drawing and making your drawings look really nice and uniform is that your structure and your foundations are correct. And so generally speaking, I'll go in with a mechanical pencil and do all of my lines nice and light. I'll start with shapes and I'll layer basic lines over the top of those shapes, and then I'll go ahead and darken those lines up a little bit just so I can see what's going on. And I think that's a really nice way to work. And I sort of can't stress enough how important these foundation lines are. You know, I think it's something that's overlooked by beginner artists, including myself when I first started, but yeah, being able to put really basic geometric shapes down in the right places builds the correct framework to be able to put down your basic lines and then build up your more detailed lines over the top of that before you start inking anything. And you know, I think this is, in my opinion, the most crucial step to learning how to draw, is learning to do your basic shapes. One thing I'd like to point out, actually, I noticed with a lot of these old school designs is I find that the proportions, like I said previously, the proportions are usually off a little bit. This panther head actually wasn't too bad, but the eyes looked quite odd. They had like weird green eyelashes or green stars around the eyes. I'm not quite sure where this originated from, but I find that a lot of traditional tattoo designs, particularly American traditional designs, tend to have these little weird oddities like green eyelashes and you know, funky looking things that they add to the animals' heads and this sort of thing. So I'm not quite sure if this was just something that was in at the time, or, you know, something that looked cool at the time. But yeah, I sort of like to make things look a little bit more realistic, or at least a little less weird in my eyes. And of course, that's not meant to disrespect the traditional art style or the traditional artists. I actually really like that style of art. It looks a bit weird, but if I didn't like it, I wouldn't be trying to do my interpretation of it or even attempt to redraw it. So if you guys are enjoying these videos, make sure you give us a thumbs up and sort of leave a comment below and let us know what else you'd like to see. I like doing tutorial videos and teaching you guys how to draw stuff. And so now we're going in again with the Copic Multiliner 0.5 and outlining everything. And then, like I said, we'll go through and boost up and, yeah, fatten up a few of those lines. I think line weight's a really crucial thing as well, especially when working with these old school sort of, or even just traditional tattoo style designs. Generally speaking, try to put fatter lines on things that you want to stand out and be bold. And you sort of put, yeah, the big beefy lines on things you want to push forward. Another thing you might notice when I do this old school traditional style work is I use heaps of black, lots of black in the shading. This is just something that I sort of learnt when I was apprenticing, and that's that tattoos should, especially old school tattoos, should have black. They need to have black. I find in general it's a good thing to do anyways, because your black sort of gives you all of your contrast and your lighting before you even start laying colours down. And if you're working with translucent inks, as I am, or semi-translucent inks, the black will sort of do all the shading for you. You don't really need to use more than a few colours. And I think the reason this gives you more of an old school appearance is because they didn't have as many colours back then to work with. So tattooing, they only had sort of a few basic colours: reds, greens, yellows, and then I think things like blues and purples were introduced a little bit later on. And of course they had black, and so they do all the outline in black and all the shading in black, and then overlay colour, and black would make up for all of the shading, all of the shadows. So you can see now I'm going in with a Copic multi-liner 0.8 and just fattening up some of those lines. Again, you just do it to bits that you want to stand out more, and sort of, yeah, just fatten up the lines that you want things to stick out more towards the front of the design. Okay, once again we're using Liquitex acrylic inks, and we actually are going to use a little bit of blue in this one, yeah, we're going to go ahead now and do all of the black shading. So same as before, we're just laying down black and then dipping a brush in water and shading that black out. I actually only recently started working with these Liquitex inks, and I found them to be really nice. Previously I was using Ecoline brush markers for all of my designs. I probably still use them for a lot of my illustration style stuff. They're a little bit easier to work with, and they work really well on hot press watercolor paper because it's so smooth. They sort of don't put out too much ink, which means you don't have any bleed. That having been said, when I do this sort of old school or traditional style stuff, I really like to try and stick to the traditional way of painting it also, which was to use, watercolor paints or inks. So yeah, that's why I sort of like using these Liquitex inks. They're also just a great medium to paint with. They're really smooth, consistency is really nice. Once they dry, they set, so they don't sort of reactivate, which is, yeah, big plus. One of the big challenges you'll notice I had here was where to put the black on a lot of this. It is a panther head, and their fur is very dark, almost black. Traditionally they're drawn with black fur, and so yeah, you kind of got to really play around and know where your highlights are going to be, because obviously you can't just have a solid black head. You still have to have some shape to it. So yeah, trying to find out where all the spots are going to be took me a little bit of time to work that out. Things like tigers and that are a little bit easier to do, I think. You'll have to make sure to let me know in the comments too what kind of stuff you guys want to see, what kind of tutorials you want to see. Any tattoo related stuff. I don't do much realism or anything these days. I used to do a fair bit of it, pencil, charcoal realism and that sort of thing, but for me it just lacked that creativity. You're sort of just copying pictures and it wasn't much fun, so I much prefer doing this illustration style stuff or tattoo style artwork. So we're jumping in with our red now, and basically going to do the same process. We're overlaying colour and then just fading out the edges to give us those little highlights. This particular red that I'm using is a pie roll red from Liquitex. I really like it. It gives you a nice consistent colour. It's nice and bright, and I think it's a true red. So a lot of the other reds that they have are sort of more of a scarlet colour or more of an orange sort of colour. This is like a true red tone, and as you can see in the ear there, it fades out to a nice pink. And so we're just doing a little bit of blue in the eyes. I like to do yellow whiskers, makes them stand out, makes them really bold and really bright. As you can see, I stick to a pretty limited colour palette when I do this sort of stuff. Like I said, they didn't have that many colours back then, so I try to stick to a really limited colour palette when I draw that style of artwork, and I find it makes it look really bold and really nice. And that's pretty much it for that one, guys.